Today on the Transplant Helper, I'm going to be sharing with you the tale that comes behind this real-life fairy tale.
I'm so happy for you.
Happy for us.
I love you.
Love you more. Jacob, the day we have waited so long for is here. We have been through so much more than most couples go through, and I know we will forever be stronger for it.
Let me say to begin with how extremely special this day is. It's probably one of the most special days I've ever been a part of. I know that's certainly the case for Jacob and Olivia. I will never forget the moment I first saw Olivia. I walked in that lobby and I first saw a beautiful young lady, but I also saw someone who was sick, someone who was struggling. I saw someone who was in enormous pain, not physically, but emotionally.
We have been through so much more than most couples go through, and I know we will forever be stronger for it.
She still faced an unknown, but she left that room that day determined to fight. She landed in CICU, one of the most critical care units of the whole hospital, and her life hung in the balance. But the whole time she fought. She didn't just fight for a day. She didn't fight for any day. She fought for today, and I'm glad she's here.
With this ring, I thee wed.
And promise unto you my everlasting love and devotion.
Promise unto you my everlasting love and devotion.
You got ahead of himself.
Pretty good. I've been waiting on this day.
I understand. About time.
With this ring, I thee wed, and promise to you my everlasting love and devotion.
I now present to you Mr. and Mrs. Jacob Stanley. You may kiss your bride, by the way. Well, what can I say about that clip? Just wow. This has certainly been a fairy tale story, and I'm excited to be able to share with you from Olivia Stanley's standpoint today exactly what it took to get to that place and to make it to a place where that could even happen. I mean, it's just unbelievable the life that Olivia has lived and the life that Jacob had already lived with her for a number of years, and just the stick-to-itiveness that they had used to stay together through all of this, and now they have the successful and happy life that they've always dreamt of. So with that being said, Olivia, I'm so excited to have you with me here on the program today, My Story, My Words. And so not to take up any more time, I just want you to start doing just that. Tell your story in your own words by starting out by telling us a little bit about yourself, maybe your family, your caregivers, something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Jim, for inviting me to do this. This is an honor, and I'm excited to do it. So a little bit about me. I'm 30 years old right now, and me and Jacob, we got married a little over just a year and a half ago. I'm an only child, and I grew up in Pinson, which is just right outside of Birmingham, Alabama, and just pretty much had from what my viewpoint was, a typical normal childhood and growing up. But looking back on it now from what I know, it really wasn't normal. Even though I wanted to just feel like I was everyone else. As far as my heart goes, I always had some chest pain and some issues with the heart disease, and so I just never really knew how much I was compensating with all the symptoms that I was experiencing.
Yeah, I mean, I know exactly where you're coming from with that, growing up congenital, even though you may or may not know exactly what's going on, still nothing's ever quite right. And so when we make it to transplant, hopefully that's successful, as it has been for us so far at least, it is a game changer. It's a whole different life, just kind of feeling what you almost think normal must have been like.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I can specifically remember looking back and being 8 years old and thinking to myself, why am I having so much trouble in PE right now? Because everybody else in my third grade class, they're doing everything perfectly fine. And I just thought that was the way everyone felt. Everyone else had that chest pain, and I actually had no clue that it was not a normal thing. I had absolutely no idea. And that's probably one of my only memories from being 8 years old. But I do remember that.
I completely understand again. Well, tell me this then. Of course, you married your sweetheart there. We showed the clip of that a minute ago. And so that, I know that took some doing. Tell me a little bit about how you got to that point. You know, how did you come to know, well, you mentioned how you kind of found that you were sick, but how did you come to know that you would eventually need a transplant? What brought you to transplant?
Yeah, absolutely. So, ended up finding out a little after I was 8. So at 12 years old, that I had hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, and transplant was not mentioned to me until I was probably 24, let's say 23 or 24.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it could have been a little earlier, but my end-stage heart failure began around the time I was 21. And even then, when I was told that that was the case, I was very, very still skeptical that transplant was ever actually going to happen. For me, I was thinking that that was very sci-fi and just something you only see in movies. And I had just so much confidence, all the confidence in the world, that I was actually not going to need a transplant. And that's just what these doctors thought, but they just really didn't know me, and they didn't know that I could push through anything. And so that's how I was first introduced to transplant, which ended up being, I would say, 5 to 6 years prior to the actual transplant happening.
Okay. So from the time transplant was mentioned, you said 5 or 6 years. Did you have any real difficulties there in that time, or was it just a slow digression down?
I did. Even though I was just so accustomed and so used to living in so much sickness, I could still recognize the fact that my fatigue was extreme. The swelling that I had due to the heart failure was also pretty extreme. I was on numerous medications. Ironically, I was taking a lot more medication then as I am now as a transplant recipient. It was hard for me to get out of bed. I couldn't participate in so many things that I wanted to. Even though I was compensating and I was thinking and acting like I could, there were still things that I knew I was missing out on. So it was pretty bad at that time, even though I was still in denial. But it just also continued to decline. And the more and more I declined, the more I was coming to realize that this transplant thing was probably going to happen. And I didn't know how in the world it would, but it was getting there.
Right. Well, I would describe you much like I was. You were a master of what I refer to as fake it till you make it. Basically,
Absolutely.
you just do the best you can and try to cover it all over and wash it all over and act. And I think it's pretty much denial is what it is, but act as if nothing's wrong. So I think it was in that time period, now not 5 or 6 years prior, but it was in that time period at least that you and I eventually met. And for those of you who have no idea about that, probably none of you do, save Olivia and myself, but basically speaking, Olivia can be credited with a huge part of this channel as far as encouraging me, motivating me, and making me finally feel useful to some point. And kind of the story, the way that happened, just briefly, I was sitting around the house one night. I think my wife had to work late, and I got a FaceTime call. I think it was a FaceTime call from Olivia, and I had 3 or 4 or 5 or seemed like 50 children running around wild that night. And she called, and I had no idea. We had never talked, never met, and had no idea. But you called and spoke with me. And at that point, I think this is why I say it fits in at this moment. You were in such denial that you were basically calling to get someone to justify you to not see the heart failure doctors and to not go into the transplant clinic. And I didn't give you that advice, did I?
No, you were extremely helpful. It's funny that you mentioned that, because even though that feels like so long ago, I can remember that call so clearly. I just reached out and asked, hey, we don't know each other, but you look like you know what you're doing here, and I have a lot of questions and a lot of reservations, and would you be okay with talking to me? And of course you were, and were so nice and helpful, and also trying to change diapers at the same time you're talking to me. So
yeah, I was doing that. Yeah, but
yeah.
That phone call turned into us actually meeting over at Kirkland Clinic. And one of the things I mentioned, I think during the wedding even, was when I first walked in and saw you. And I saw, I described you then as a beautiful young lady, but at the same time, someone who emotionally was struggling and hurting and in probably far worse shape physically than you certainly wanted to admit. So I'm glad we got to meet that way. But that brings us to that period of time where you've been already told a few years prior now, I'm understanding that you needed the transplant, but you, like I did, you waded through those waters for quite a while and run it to the end, I guess.
Yes, absolutely. And I can specifically remember as well after we met and my mom was with me and I was telling her, I told Mom, I said, you look so healthy. I was just so encouraged just to just see you and meet you in person, because obviously you would have no idea that you had received a heart transplant. And in the state that I was in, it was very encouraging to see how you just looked great. You looked like you were doing good. You weren't, having any issues going up and down the stairs. And, here I am with struggling almost every step. So that was great to see.
Yeah, well, I'm glad that part of it was an encouragement as well. That's why I came that day. I came hoping that maybe if we saw face to face that I could crack in that little hard noggin of yours and convince you to do this. But if I remember right, now you can tell this for yourself, but you went ahead. This is the case. I know you went ahead, kind of took my advice, at least made the appointment, got in to see the doctors over there, Dr. DeLodge, Dr. Bambuka, and some of the others. But things kind of took a really, what would you say, a shocking turn for you. How did that come down? What pushed you over that edge?
So my very first appointment was made, and I saw Dr. Pambukian, and, I'm sure it didn't take her very long to determine that, yes, I was very sick and we were going to need to evaluate some things. So they went ahead and made the appointment and told me that this appointment that I'm referencing now was on January the 11th.
Okay.
And this was of 2018. And they went ahead and told me, yes, we do think that you could be a potential candidate, but we want you to know you cannot be too well or you cannot be too sick. And so they went ahead and scheduled the decision for the entire team of doctors to classify whether or not I was going to be a candidate to be put on the transplant list was going to fall on March the 8th of 2018. So, a couple months out. And I was okay with that. I was fine. I was just ready to get things going, which going back for just a moment back to deciding to go to the appointment, even though I was hesitant and I did not want to transplant as probably every single other person in the world would feel, I was also very aware at that point of how rapid my decline was. And I was pretty desperate to get any help and to get things rolling as fast as I could, because I was also afraid that maybe I had waited too long. Maybe things had not been escalated with my prior physician quickly enough. And so I was just really ready to get things going. So after that January 11th appointment, I started having my test done, which you've already done a fabulous job of explaining the evaluation testing, and people listening probably are familiar with that, but it's usually about a week-long period. And so that testing was being scheduled, and halfway through that period, it was a Wednesday with that testing, I was having the right heart cath done, which is part of it, and I had just not a good experience with that right heart cath. Before I even got up off the table, I could feel that something was wrong. Something did not feel right on the right side of my body, really around my lungs and that chest cavity area. So ended up, I told the doctor, and nothing really came of that, but ended up, I still went home that day and was going to return the very next day to finish up the appointments and the testing. And that afternoon, after I'd gotten home, we called back because I could just tell things weren't right. I wasn't able to take a deep breath and was getting some sharp pains while doing that. So ended up going back to the hospital and being admitted at 5 o'clock that afternoon on that Wednesday for what they thought was potential pneumonia. Right. Even though I was having no coughing, which is very common, a terrible cough. I did not have that, but I was having something show up on the x-ray, on the CT scan, actually. So that night that I was admitted on that Wednesday night, basically to just move forward at a little bit of a faster pace here, I ended up having a pulseless electrical activity cardiac arrest on that Friday afterwards. And it was actually not long after they were getting ready to discharge me so that I could just finish my testing outpatient. But I had that PEA arrest, and things got moving very quickly, like you referenced earlier. I was rushed off to the heart-lung transplant intensive care unit, and they were just really doing everything they possibly could. They ended up doing ECMO for me for the emergent surgery, and that was at bedside in the unit itself, so not on the ER. And I can strangely remember a lot of things that I don't think they really thought I would be remembering, because at the time they were kind of thinking that I was completely unconscious due to the fact that I didn't have a pulse. But they had turned me up on my head in the hospital bed with Trendelenburg, and I actually do remember hearing so much chaos and so much commotion going on. And so I do remember actually bits and pieces of them cannulating me with the ECMO, and that was in my right groin. And yeah, I can remember waking up even during that process and being ventilated and not having a clue why I couldn't breathe very well, but it was because I had a tube down my throat. And so that process really, just to move forward again, like I said, that is what really put me on the list. That was a Friday night, and that was February 2nd of 2018. I was put on the list somewhere between, let's say, 11 to 12 a.m. that night, and woke up the very next morning by the grace of God, thankfully. Amen. But my family had to go home that night and be told that we would just have to see what happens the next day. They didn't know how much brain damage I had, or if I had any at all, or what was going to happen, or how I was going to wake up. But that very next morning, I woke up, and I was, the way I look at it now, I think I was just honestly so happy to be alive, because I can remember just being giddy and excited, and I woke up ventilated, but that was also some painkiller medication wearing off. But I can remember thinking to myself, remembering bits and pieces of what I went through the night before, and just praying over and over again to let me live through this, because I needed to live through this. And yeah, I woke up. My mom was already there waiting on me, and they let her come back there. And I can remember scribbling down some notes there to my very first CICU nurse, and asking her how much longer would I need to be on the vent. And she was telling me I was doing a great job, and she said about 45 more minutes. And so that's all it took, and I was taken off. And it wasn't until that afternoon, so I would say I woke up about 8:30 the next morning. And funny enough, it wasn't until about, I don't know, I'll guess and say 4 o'clock that I really looked down and looked to my right and grasped the concept of what was going on, and seeing 2 tubes coming out of my leg, and then saying, yeah, this machine is circulating the blood in your body and doing the work that your lungs and your heart would be doing. And I was like, oh, okay, well, this is a big deal.
Oh, yeah.
It seems like a big deal. So that is what brought me to my wait. And so I waited on ECMO. I waited 34 days, about that period of time.
Okay.
I was awake the entire time. I was never put in any induced coma or anything. And also started out with a balloon pump in the opposite groin for about 4 days, I think. So that didn't stay in very long, but I made it. I made it to the end.
Yeah, well, not to take away anything from your horror or the families, there's no doubt it must have been unbelievable. But there's a boy in Munford, Alabama, that was scared to death at that point, because somebody reached out to me pretty quick, and because I knew you were going in for your evaluation. It's like, hey, today went good. Yesterday, whatever, everything was going good as far as I knew. And then somebody reached out. I don't know if it was Miss Alice or who. By that point, I'd connected with a lot of your family and friends already, but somebody reached out and told me what had happened, and it just terrified me. My heart hurt just thinking about it. And so I don't know if it was the next day or probably the next. You were laying at one point, I was standing at your feet because I was just terrified, and I needed to lay eyes on you and see that you were, that you even had a chance, because some of these situations are, I hate to say what it is, but they're kind of situations where mentally, because I've dealt with it through so many lives, that I almost, I know what can happen, but at the same time, I almost write people off too, because I think, well, we tried, kind of a situation. I've lost a lot of good friends that way, and I think, well, we tried, but this wasn't it. But it wasn't it. It wasn't it for you. And so you just mentioned you waited 34 days from the time of being officially listed to that point. Now, tell us a little bit then. You got a special situation, I know, if you can share some of it. Tell us a little bit about how you came to actually get a transplant, because, yes, you got a random transplant like anybody else, but there's something a little bit different about yours, right?
There is. Very, very, very special. I would love to mention Morgan Bone. Morgan Bone is who was right next door to me when I woke up that day. And I say next door because there was curtains separating us and CICU. And love it, hate it. That's just what it was. I ended up loving it because I had an awesome, amazing family next door to me. Her mom is Michelle, and her sister is Madison, and her dad Lance. And so we all became quick friends with them. It didn't take long before Morgan's friends were coming over to meet me, and was just really lifting my spirits. And I was happy to talk to somebody, and just to see and hear that they were visiting her and her situation. She was also, unfortunately, very sick at the time, very sick, and with respiratory failure due to the flu, unfortunately. I got to know her and the best that I could, unfortunately, without us being able to just look at each other and talk. We talked to each other through the curtains and talked to her mom a lot. And so back to the heart that I received. Her Morgan's travel basketball coach actually contacted her mom, and it was a very just sad and unfortunate situation because he had asked Michelle if Morgan potentially needed a lung transplant because of his niece was currently in the hospital and was getting ready to be able to donate miraculously. And Michelle, was very appreciative, but said, no, I'm sorry, just Morgan's not to that point yet. And she's not on the transplant list, actually, but our neighbor, Olivia, really needs a heart transplant. We just have grown to know her and love her, and she actually needs one like yesterday. And so Morgan's travel basketball coach, he said, all right, well, that's it. That's who I want this heart to go to. I want it to go to Olivia, and I just need to know her date of birth, and I'll send this information off, and I'll get this going. And I've since come to find out, not too long after that was called a directed donation.
Right.
And I've also found out that how extremely rare that is. Apparently, it's just hardly ever happens. I mean, years can go by, and that will not pan out in the way that it did for me, thank God. But it did. And his niece was a perfect match for me, really down to dotting the I's and crossing the T's. Everything was a really, really, really good match, and that is exactly how it panned out. So that was on a Sunday. That was on a Saturday. And I got my transplant on Monday, and that was March the 5th, 2018, which, if you can remember back a few minutes ago, the decision, quote, decision, wasn't actually scheduled until March the 8th.
Right.
Back before all this went down. So I actually ended up with that heart 3 days prior to when that was supposed to have been decided on. It was very, very, very cool.
Well, you made the decision for them the way you were acting out, trying to show out in CICU for sure.
Exactly.
And but I remember probably, not nearly the detail of you, but like the dates, but I remember the story so vividly because not only was I coming to CICU to visit with you every day or two, I was getting over to see Morgan as well. And when she was right next door, and then she eventually got moved over to another familiar unit to us and got to spend some time with her and her family. Of course, we know her struggles and what they turned out to be wasn't good, but the life that this friendship brought between you and her parents and your parents, and it's just unbelievable that it's the way it works. It's really definitely a God move.
I owe it all to her. Yes, and she was an absolute just sweetheart. I mean, just an angel. Like the way that she carried herself and the things that she said, and as positive as she was, it was very, very inspirational to me. It always will be inspirational.
So tell us a little bit about your recovery. Let's just move on to that, I guess. Tell us a little bit about your recovery, because it's during the recovery, again, that this infamous wedding clip that I showed earlier comes in, because if I'm not mistaken, that wedding got delayed a little bit.
It did. It absolutely did. So Jacob and I were engaged actually at the time of this, transplant, and just me declining so rapidly. The cardiac arrest is what I was trying to think of. But we had been engaged for probably 3 years at that time, 2 to 3 years. And we're so excited and looking forward to getting to plan our wedding and getting to have our wedding. But at the same time, we also knew in the back of our heads that, unfortunately, I was declining, and it was happening at a lot faster pace than we anticipated. So there was a lot of just sadness for me, and just worrying and thinking, when could this ever happen? This is something that I'm so happy and excited about, like everyone is and would be, and looking forward to. So I was just so happy when things were going good and I had gotten my transplant, which was a success. Things went pretty smoothly, and I did stay in the hospital about 1 more month after that. I came home and things were going well. I always like to say in my recovery that I had all of my big issues prior to transplant, and not after transplant, which for some people it's totally reversed. For some people it happens a little bit of both. But I have been what I feel like extremely blessed and lucky and very fortunate to not have encountered very many issues in recovery. I will say it's pretty common, as you probably know, to expect that 1 year recovery time. But I do think for me personally, it was closer to about 1.5 years before I was able to start functioning. I felt like on a pretty typical level of just energy and getting my medication situated. I have not had to be rehospitalized, knock on wood here, and since I was officially discharged from my transplant, which something I'm so proud of, but I also definitely recognize that even if it does happen, or Mike could say when it does happen, because they potentially will be something, even if it's just for my next transplant, that, it's not anything that I can help. And it's just part of the life and part of the process. So, I just had a few issues with, say, very low white blood cell count, where I was quarantining before quarantining was a thing to do, prior to the pandemic, just because of some issues with getting my anti-rejection straightened out and getting off the antivirals and things that were really, really killing my immune system too low. So I do think things have been pretty balanced for a while now, and I've not been sick in a very, very long time. I've had 2 sinus infections and like 1 cold, and that's probably one of the things I'm absolutely most thankful for in the world right now. Extremely thankful for that, and just trying to stay as safe as I can possibly stay. So recovery has actually gone, I think, as well as it could have gone.
Right. Well, that is awesome. That is awesome. And you've done so well. I mean, obviously bumps in the road. I know some of those bumps you've experienced, but thankfully they've not been heart related and they've not been severe enough to Dean put you in the hospital. So that's been very, very exciting to watch that happen for sure. Let me just continue to prod at this until we get it. During your recovery then, finally things get to a place where you said maybe a year and a half or so you level out. You decide that your health is stabilized at that point. So you go back and you back up 4.5 years, and you decide to reunite this wedding planning, right?
Absolutely. I was so excited when I realized that we could just finally get started on this process. And I will say one of the main things that I was really wanted to get out of my system was that prednisone. My face was very large from that prednisone, just as it does for every single other person that has to take it for long periods of time like I was. And so I wanted to make sure, like, hey, I do not want this prednisone face in any of my wedding pictures. And so once I felt like I was out of the woods with that situation, we were so excited and we were so happy to hire Becky, the most fabulous wedding planner in Birmingham, and she was so wonderful to work with. And so we got that process started to have our absolutely gorgeous wedding that we were so blessed to have. Yes.
Let me throw in right here now. I'm speaking out for Jacob right now, okay? Okay. You were worried about the prednisone face. He was probably worried about the prednisone attitude himself. Some of the problems that come along with that. No, I doubt that very seriously with you, but we all know where we've been and what we've done and what we can blame that, dirty little devil medicine on,
It was hard.
Oh, yeah. The emotions are just everywhere.
Yeah, it was very hard. For me, actually, I feel like my emotions were very low and they just stayed low. It was just a sad, negative time. And, as far as recovery goes with the prednisone, that first year out was just like you're doing the best you can, but also having to take this medication because it lowers your immune system and it's part of your regimen. But yeah, prednisone for me, I didn't have very many like ups and downs with my emotions per se, but it was just they stayed very low consistently. Right. And so that was just a huge relief to just start functioning back exactly how I wanted to feel, just normal again. Yeah,
to start planning for that day, and a beautiful day it was, and the fairy tale that is not ended, certainly not ended. Don't let me mess up and say that, but this fairy tale that is not ended, that is now continuing, not as Olivia Hollis anymore, but Olivia Stanley, which I was excited to be there and to witness that. But it's just been beautiful so far, and I'm glad that your recovery has done as well as it has. Let me ask you 2 more questions really quickly. First of all, let me ask you this. What have been the best and the worst things about transplant for you? What have been the best and the worst things about transplant for you?
Right now, one of the first things that I can think about when I think of the best things for me is it's not given me back my ability, but it's given me the ability for the very first time ever to feel like I can do things like go to Disney World. I can walk around and not have to be in so much pain and not have to, be worried about being that burden and slowing everyone down. And even though, I really knew that I wasn't a burden, it didn't change the fact that I still felt that way. So that's been one of the best things, is it's taken that away. I don't feel like that anymore. And I know I can fully participate and be present in anything that I want to do now. One of those things especially is just being able to be active and go bike riding, go work out, go do anything I want to do. It's given me that for the first time, because I was unfortunately just not ever able to participate in anything like that because I had so much chest pain and shortness of breath, and I was just held back from doing any kind of exercise. And that's just awesome for me now that I don't have that holding me back. And I'm pretty much cleared to do anything I want to do.
Yeah.
And then moving on to the worst thing, one of the first things that pops in my head for the worst thing is taking these terrible for your body medications twice a day. Yes, they are terrible for your body, but it is what, as everyone knows, probably it's what keeps us alive. It's what we have to do to stay alive. For some people, it's every 6 hours. For me right now, it's every 12 hours. You know, obviously it's twice a day. So I know that the medication that we have to take is maybe causing me to just not feel good sometimes, or this, that, and the other, just because it's essentially damaging your body. But I also have to just remind myself at times when I get frustrated about it that it's also what is keeping us alive. And so I will, you know, at the end of the day, yes, I will gladly take it every day until the end of time. But that just to say, I guess bluntly, that is the worst thing, because I wish that I could just not take anything. But,
Right.
you know, the medications are just so hard on you, and you just have to take them. So that's just part of it.
Yeah, part of it. And like you say, it's giving us life. It sometimes feels like it may be taking just a little bit as it goes, but it's given plenty of life to us so far, and thankful that they even exist. So this question here's a big one now. And to me, you've been a tremendous inspiration. You've certainly been a motivator for me, and I know a lot of other people. You've been involved with our, you know, statewide organ donor awareness OPOs and all that such. And so I know you're doing a lot of good for a lot of people. But if you were to talk directly now to just those people who are either waiting on or maybe shortly after their transplant, what would be the best piece of advice you could give them?
Yeah, and I love doing this. I love when people reach out to me, or caregivers reach out to me. It makes me feel like I am doing good and helping them in some way. But the first piece of advice I would say would to be as positive as you can be in the situation that you're currently in. Even if you have to artificially manufacture that positiveness.
Fake it till you make it.
Absolutely. And that is really what I did. I had so much positivity some days while I was hooked up to ECMO and basically in a dire life or death situation. I mean, not basically, I was. Mean, it's just that I was. I sometimes even shocked my own self at how positive I was in that situation. And I think it was just because I was forcing myself to be positive. I would tell myself that I had 5 or 10 minutes to cry every day, and that was going to be enough. And after that, I was just going to move on with the day. And if I felt like I needed to cry again, I would just remember that, hey, tomorrow you've got that time to cry, and you're not going to spend more than 10 minutes doing that. And I think in some way that was helpful to, you know, you still need to get your feelings out. And if you want to cry, that's still important, you know, obviously, but just to say, okay, after that's over with, I'm going to make the best of this situation. And so that is some important advice. And for also someone who maybe has just had a transplant, just to remember, even though it may be the hardest thing to do in that moment or that day, that your recovery, it's going to take a long time, but it's also going to get better each and every day. Every hour that passes, even though your recovery is not going to be in a straight line, it's getting better each and every day, and you're you're learning how to live your new life every single day.
Right.
And that it's an important part that you have to go through to value the good and see the good in things in the future. You have to, unfortunately, go through those bad times, but the good times are waiting for you. As much as you may run into issues and roadblocks, it's always going to get better.
Absolutely. That's excellent advice. And there's no doubt about it. Both pieces of advice, excellent advice, just to give yourself the time to be, teary-eyed and what have you, but make sure that you balance your day more heavily toward just thinking positive, just getting the best mindset you can, and then, in turn, using that to your advantage. I'm just wondering, back then, did that Stay Stronger Friend T-shirt ever help you a little bit on that?
It did.
I know it did for me.
Love that. Absolutely, it did. I love that, and I always tell people that other transplant recipients. I just think that's a great term and a great mindset, and just keep on keeping on doing what you're doing is just the way to be.
Yeah, we've certainly both been given, and many of us who are listening and everyone else been given a tremendous opportunity at life, and the best we can make of it is the best. Just to keep reaching as high as we can and set those bars just above the head. But as soon as you reach them, not be afraid to reach even higher. Just keep going. So, well, I have enjoyed hearing your story. I know we had to do it kind of quickly, so there are a lot of bits and pieces in there that we didn't get to. But the way that you told it just really shows us all not only the things that we have in common in some areas, but also the things that we're so different at. But the struggle that we share is real, but the positive outcomes are definitely realer, and I made up that word, but realer than even those. So I'm glad that you were able to tell that story today.
Well, you're so welcome. Thank you so much. I really love doing that.
Well, it's definitely been a blessing to me. And anyone who has any questions, if you'd like to reach out to myself, or I'm sure Olivia as well, you can comment in the descriptions below. Send me a text. I'll put my number up here on the screen, and you can get in touch with either of us through that sort of kinda. And we'd be more than happy to help you. We just want to help to continue to motivate you to be the best that you can and to give you the best tools that you can moving forward. And I'm just thankful that Olivia has this story to tell. And again, I refer to it as a fairy tale, but this one is real life. This one actually happened, and it's just a wonderful story. But thank you so much, Olivia, for being with us and or spending time with me today. And all of you who are watching, thank you so much for being with us today. And so I guess I'll let you say the final little words here. You know what those words are, Olivia? Well, you going to tell them all?
Stay stronger, friend.
Absolutely. Thank you.